In our Lord's year, 1872, the Harvine plantation stood as a monument to Southern glory that was fading. They called it Magnolia House, though other names were what the locals whispered when passing its wrought iron gates. Once brilliant against the verdant landscape, the white-columned facade had yellowed like aging teeth, and under the weight of accumulated misfortune, the wraparound verandas sagged. Over the estate that August evening, the summer air hung thick as molasses, the gathering dusk punctuated by fireflies like wandering souls. Their nightly chorus was sung by crickets, a steady rhythm beneath the whippoorwill's occasional mournful call. Inside the main house, behind heavy damask curtains that stirred in the feeble breeze, Eliza Harvine clutched her swollen belly and prayed to a God she was no longer certain heard her. Her third child this would be, though the nursery upstairs was graced by no living offspring. Perpetually prepared, the room remained, a walnut cradle draped with fine lace, porcelain dolls arranged on shelves with vacant eyes, a rocking horse waiting forever for its first ride. The rest of the story was told by the two small gravestones in the family plot. Born 1867, died 1880, Abigail Harvine. William Harvine, born 1869, died 1882. Neither firstborn had survived their 13th year. It was the same with the master's siblings, whispered Matilda, the grey-haired house servant who had been with the Harvines since before the war, and his father before him, and his grandfather, too. No Harvine firstborn ever sees 14 summers. This peculiar tragedy was confirmed by the family histories recorded in the leather-bound Bible, stretching back 7 generations to when the first Harvines had claimed this land from the swamp. 23 firstborn children, 23 deaths before the 13th birthday was complete. To fever or accident some succumbed, others to bizarre circumstances that defied medical explanation. Merely unfortunate coincidence, Dr. Chemo had declared, though his eyes betrayed his unease when summoned to Magnolia House. A different explanation was tiptoed around by the plantation workers from the quarters, one involving a Creole woman displaced when Jonathan Harvine's ancestors seized her ancestral lands. Her curse, they said, in the fertile soil that nourished the sugarcane still lingered, in the water drawn from the well behind the kitchen house, in the very air that filled the lungs of Harvine children. Now outside his wife's bedchamber, Cornelius Harvine paced the hallway, pocket watch in hand, counting seconds that stretched like years. Tonight the child would be born under the waning gibbous moon. Another firstborn to love, to raise, and to bury before the bloom of adolescence transformed child to adult, if history were to be believed. A fresh plot had already been measured in the corner of the plantation cemetery, though the grim calculation would be admitted by no one. A small coffin was kept in reserve by the undertaker in town, knowing the Harvine custom of preparedness. And somewhere in the sprawling house, amidst the imported furniture and fading portraits, a clock ticked away, counting down 13 years that seemed both infinite and cruelly brief. Through the house, Eliza's screams ascended like tormented spirits, punctuated by the midwife's stern encouragements. Outside the birthing room, the silver crucifix that hung about his neck was clutched by Cornelius. A family heirloom passed down alongside their terrible legacy. Not merely to provide comfort had the parish priest, Father Thibodeau, been summoned, but to perform the baptism immediately. Unbaptized for even a day was no Harvine firstborn permitted to exist, lest the curse claim them prematurely. Midnight was struck by the grandfather clock in the foyer, its sonorous chimes reverberating through the cavernous halls. The house itself seemed to inhale and hold its breath, waiting. The corridor was lined with portraits of Harvine ancestors, their oil-painted eyes following Cornelius as he paced. In each frame, a parent stood with hand resting possessively upon a child's shoulder. Children who had all been interred in the somber family plot that sprawled beneath the ancient live oak. Master Harvine, called Matilda, appearing like an apparition at the hallway's end, her dark skin glistening with perspiration in the lamplight. "It's time." Considerably, the Harvine fortune had diminished in the years following the war between the states. Only a quarter of its former workforce was maintained by the once grand plantation, now paid meager wages instead of suffering under the lash. Yet the shadows of bondage remained, fraught in the relationship between master and servant. Every Harvine child since 1845 had been delivered by Matilda. She had also prepared each firstborn's body for burial. Volumes of medical texts Cornelius had imported from Philadelphia, London, and Paris were contained in the vast library downstairs. Desperate attempts to understand what claimed his family's heirs. One shelf held journals documenting each child's development, searching for patterns that might reveal some hereditary ailment. Another contained arcane works on regional folklores and superstitions, acquired discreetly through book dealers who asked no questions. A piercing cry cut through the humid night. Not Eliza's pain, but the first wail of new life. In Cornelius's heart, relief and dread intertwined like honeysuckle and nightshade. "A daughter, sir," announced Dr. Chemo, emerging with sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands still pink from washing. "Healthy lungs, all limbs accounted for. Mrs. Harvine is weakened but stable." A celebration would be expected by the neighboring plantations, mint juleps served on silver trays, a christening gown displayed for admiring matrons, perhaps even a small orchestra brought upriver from New Orleans. With hollow smiles, these social obligations would be performed by the Harvines, knowing their joy carried an expiration date 13 years hence. In the kitchen house, separated from the main dwelling by a covered walkway, a sprig of dried vervain was slipped by the cook, Josephine, into the soup destined for the new mother's recovery. Among her people, brought generations ago from Saint-Domingue, such herbs were said to ward off malevolent spirits. Their own traditions to protect the doomed Harvine children were practiced by the household staff in shadows and whispers. Unofficial baptisms in sugarcane fields under full moons. Protective gree-gree tucked into the corners of cradles. Prayers offered to saints the church barely recognized. The bedchamber was entered by Cornelius, where Eliza lay propped against embroidered pillows, her copper hair plastered to her forehead, cradling their newborn daughter. In her exhausted eyes, he saw not just maternal tenderness, but the terrible knowledge that another sacrifice to whatever dark covenant haunted their bloodline they had created. "She shall be called Eleanor," Cornelius declared, his voice barely audible above the chorus of night creatures beyond the window. "After my grandmother." The choice was deliberate, almost defiant. A second-born child had been grandmother Eleanor, spared the Harvine curse, who lived to the venerable age of 78, the longest-lived Harvine in their sordid history. Perhaps some protective charm was carried by the name itself. With unusual solemnity, the baptism was performed by Father Thibodeau, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he administered the holy water, his cassock, threadbare at the elbows, carrying the faint perfume of incense and candle wax. 2 Harvine children already had the old priest baptized and buried. With age and whiskey, his eyes, rheumy, avoided meeting Cornelius's gaze directly. "May God, in his infinite mercy," he intoned, the Latin phrases flowing from his lips with practiced rhythm, "protect this child from all harm, visible and invisible." At the doorway, the household staff clustered, their faces solemn masks of ceremony, though a small amulet hidden in her apron pocket was worked by Josephine's fingers. Closest stood Matilda, her tall figure straight despite her 60 years, silver hair pulled tightly beneath a head wrap of indigo cloth. She alone dared to look directly at the infant, her dark eyes assessing. "Strong one, this child," she murmured, reaching out a gnarled finger to touch Eleanor's flushed cheek. "Got the fight in her." Indeed, with an unusual vigor, Eleanor Harvine entered the world. Where the previous Harvine firstborns had been delicate creatures with translucent skin and reedy cries, Eleanor's lusty wails rattled the crystal pendants on the bedside lamp. With surprising force, her tiny fists punched the air, and none of the pallor that had marked her siblings from birth was borne by her complexion. Within a fortnight of Eleanor's arrival, Isaiah Thornfield was summoned by Cornelius, a bespectacled scholar from Boston with unconventional theories about hereditary afflictions. Wearing a frock coat of severe cut, the man arrived, his collar high and stiff, his demeanor that of someone more comfortable among books than plantation society. "I make no guarantees, Mr. Harvine," Thornfield stated as he arranged peculiar instruments on the library table. "The mysteries of bloodline maladies have not yet been fully illuminated by science, but every relevant detail I shall observe and record throughout her development." Proper St. Francisville society was scandalized by Thornfield's methods, measuring the circumference of Eleanor's skull monthly, collecting samples of her hair and nail clippings, documenting the precise shade of her developing irises. About Yankee witchcraft and godless experimentation, local matrons whispered behind fans. But by their censure, Cornelius remained unmoved. What price was too high to save one's child? Meanwhile, Eliza recovered from childbirth with remarkable quickness, driven by a mother's determination. Her own journal she had begun keeping, separate from her husband's clinical documentation. In it, she recorded not medical observations, but moments of joy: Eleanor's first smile, the sweet milky scent of her breath, the perfect curl of her miniature fingers around Eliza's own. "Completely, we shall love her," Eliza whispered to the sleeping infant one evening as twilight painted the nursery walls in violet shadows. "Whatever time we are granted." In her 6th year, a change came over Eleanor. Subtle at first, like the initial browning of autumn leaves before they surrendered to decay. The child, who had flourished against all expectations, developed a peculiar habit of rising before dawn, her small bare feet making no sound as she traversed the polished cypress floors to stand beneath the portrait of Abigail, her long-deceased sister. "She speaks to me," Eleanor confided one morning to Matilda, who had discovered the child bathed in the grainy blue light of pre-dawn, her nightgown pristine white against the shadowed hallway. "Abigail says, they're waiting for me in the cane fields." At her waist, a protective sign was formed by Matilda's arthritic fingers, hidden within the folds of her dress. "Who waits, child?" she asked, though her lined face suggested she feared the answer. "The others, all 13 of them." An unnatural clarity was carried by Eleanor's voice, her pronunciation too precise for a girl of 6. "In the mist they hold hands when the moon is high. They want me to join their circle." Curious arrangements left in Eleanor's wake were begun to be noticed by the household staff. A semicircle of her porcelain dolls positioned facing her empty bed, their glass eyes reflecting lamplight with unnerving focus. On window sills, small towers of smooth river stones appeared, balanced with impossible precision. Across the nursery floor, dried magnolia petals, brown and curled like ancient fingers, would be found scattered in perfect spirals. With scientific detachment, these developments were documented by Dr. Thornfield, though his handwriting grew increasingly agitated in his private notes. Subject exhibits behavioral anomalies consistent with ancestral patterns at precisely the midpoint between birth and predicted terminus, he wrote one evening, the nib of his pen tearing the paper in places. One humid August night, precisely 6 years and 6 months after Eleanor's birth, the child was discovered by Josephine standing in the kitchen house well past midnight, methodically arranging chicken bones into a peculiar pattern that made the old cook's heart stutter in her chest. A symbol no Christian would recognize was formed by the bones, yet disturbingly familiar to Josephine, who had learned certain forbidden knowledge from her grandmother. "What are you making, child?" Josephine whispered, reluctant to disturb the midnight silence, yet more afraid to allow the design's completion. "A key," replied Eleanor, her eyes reflecting the single candle's flame as twin points of amber light. "Abigail says we need a key to unlock the door that keeps us here." Altered, Eliza began finding her daughter's journal entries. Childish drawings of the plantation overlaid with elaborate patterns that resembled the branching of blood vessels or the winding paths of labyrinthine gardens. In one corner of each drawing, 13 stick figures stood holding hands in a circle, with the 14th figure always drawn slightly apart, as if hesitating to join them. From the nursery, all timepieces were removed by Cornelius after Eleanor demonstrated an uncanny ability to announce the hour without reference to clock or watch. 6 years and 7 months and 12 days, she would recite unprompted, her voice sing-song, yet eerily devoid of childish inflection. 5 years, 5 months, and 18 days remaining. With merciless heat, the summers in St. Francisville passed. Time measured in the growth of sugarcane and the slow transformation of Eleanor from peculiar child to inscrutable young girl. By her 9th year, to the rich auburn that marked the Harvine women, her copper hair had darkened, and her eyes, once the indeterminate blue of infancy, had settled into a disconcerting amber green that caught the light like polished citrine. More voluminous grew Isaiah Thornfield's documentation, his clinical observations peppered with increasingly troubled personal asides. May 17, 1881. Subject continues normal physical development, though remains below average weight despite adequate nutrition. Most concerning is her growing preoccupation with the family cemetery. Today discovered her making meticulous sketches of the 13 firstborn gravestones complete with accurate dates despite never having been taught to read the weathered inscriptions. When questioned, subject replied, "They told me their stories." And the last page of the book. Sprigs of rue and rowan above every doorway were taken to hanging by Josephine, while the threshold was secretly baptized each morning by Matilda with water blessed by a conjure woman who lived deep in the cypress swamp. Its veneer of genteel southern propriety was maintained by the Harvine household, hosting occasional soirees where Eleanor would be presented in starched dresses with her hair arranged in perfect ringlets, performing recitations of poetry with mechanical precision, while visitors remarked on her peculiar charm. Such an unusual child, they would whisper behind lace fans. So composed for her years. In polite company, none dared mention the curse, though every invitation accepted to Magnolia House came with the morbid fascination of those who count the days of a terminal patient. In the library, a previously overlooked journal belonging to his great-grandfather, Jonathan Harvine, was discovered by Cornelius, hidden within a false compartment of an escritoire. His blood was chilled by the yellowed page's entries. October 3, 1812. I have at last traced the origin of our family's burden to its source. The Creole woman was not merely displaced from her land, as family legend suggests. She was with child by my grandfather when he claimed her property through legal chicanery. Into the well that now serves our household, she cast herself in her despair, her unborn child perishing with her. Her final words recorded by a house slave who witnessed the tragedy haunt me, "As you have taken my firstborn, so shall all your firstborns be taken." Until 13 generations have paid the debt, or until one among them chooses to remain with us willingly. I fear we have completed but 6 generations of this grim sentence. One midnight, Eleanor was found by Eliza standing motionless beside this same well, which still provided water for the kitchen house. The child's nightgown billowed slightly, though no breeze stirred the heavy air. "Do you hear them, mother?" Eleanor asked without turning. "They're singing beneath the water." "Who sings, my darling?" Eliza whispered, afraid to approach, yet more afraid to leave her daughter alone in the darkness. "The waiting ones. They're teaching me their song, so I'll recognize it when my time comes." Finally, Eleanor turned, her face serene in the moonlight. "There's a choice, you know." Abigail and William didn't understand, but I do. "What choice, Eleanor?" Eliza's voice trembled. Whether to die as they did, the child's voice remained unnervingly calm, or to join them willingly when the 13th year comes. With a summer drought that withered the sugarcane and turned the Mississippi's edges to cracked mud, Eleanor's 10th year arrived. The plantation's productivity suffered, forcing Cornelius to dismiss 3 field hands and reduce Thornfield's stipend. Though the observation of the Harvine child was refused to be abandoned by the scientist, the growing tension within Magnolia House seemed to be mirrored by the parched landscape, where a constant source of unease had become Eleanor's presence. Westward toward the family cemetery faced the girl's bedroom window, and in the furnace heat of late afternoon, for hours she would sit watching the sun cast lengthening shadows across the weathered stones. With drawings not of dolls or flowers, but intricate renderings of the cemetery's wrought iron gate, her sketchbook filled. Each curlicue and finial was captured with unsettling precision. "She's communicating with them," Matilda confided to Josephine one evening as they prepared supper in the stifling kitchen house. "I've seen her lips moving, though no sound comes out. And sometimes when I pass the cemetery at dusk, childish laughter among the graves I hear, though no living child plays there." Herself was crossed by Josephine, adding another pinch of protective herbs to the evening's cornbread. "3 more years," she murmured. Just 3 more years to break the chain. In his private study, Cornelius had begun corresponding with an occultist from New Orleans, a woman of mixed heritage who claimed expertise in generational curses. Written in an elegant hand on paper scented with vetiver, her letters suggested a ritual of substitution might satisfy the vengeful spirits. An offering of significant value in place of the 13th firstborn. The original debt was a life for a life, she wrote. Perhaps another exchange might balance the scales without demanding Eleanor's blood. These letters were discovered by Eliza and confronted her husband beneath the moss-draped oak that scented their garden. The afternoon heat had driven most living creatures to seek shelter, leaving them alone in the shimmering air. "You would traffic with spiritualists now," she demanded, her voice tight with restrained fury. "After all your scientific inquiries and rational approaches." A decade in the past 10 years had been aged in Cornelius's face. Lines etched deeply around eyes that rarely found peaceful sleep. "I would traffic with the devil himself if it would save our daughter." At the foot of her parents' bed, Eleanor appeared that night, her thin white nightgown ghostly in the darkness. Neither Cornelius nor Eliza had heard her enter. Yet suddenly she stood there, amber-green eyes reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the shutters. "Something I found today," she announced, her voice unnaturally composed. In her outstretched palm lay a tarnished silver locket, its chain broken and green with age. Beneath the oldest magnolia tree it was buried, where the roots have started to surface. Immediately, it was recognized by Cornelius. The portrait locket that had belonged to his great-grandmother, said to contain a lock of hair from each firstborn child. It had been buried with his grandfather's sister, another 13-year-old casualty of the family curse. "What it took, the ground is giving back," Eleanor explained as if reciting a lesson. "They say it's nearly time for the circle to complete itself." On the morning of Eleanor's 11th birthday, a package arrived from Paris, wrapped in brown paper and secured with wax seals bearing an unfamiliar crest. The parcel had been addressed to Cornelius Harvine in a spidery hand, but it was Eleanor who appeared in the foyer the moment the delivery boy's footsteps faded from the porch steps. "For me it is," she said simply, reaching for the package before her father could object. Inside lay a leather-bound tome entitled Lignus Mordites, UN Catalogue de Maledictions Familiales *, published in 1798. Naturally, to a chapter detailing the Harvine curse, the book fell open, though the family name appeared in its original French spelling, *Harvin star. As he scanned the yellowed pages, which contained information about his ancestors that he had never encountered in any family record, Cornelius paled. The text revealed that Maurice Harvine, the first to arrive in Louisiana in 1736, had not merely displaced a Creole woman, as family legend suggested. She had been a practicing mambo named Celestine Lavoie, distant relation to the more famous Marie Laveau of New Orleans. To learn the location of a rumored treasure on her ancestral lands, Maurice had seduced Celestine, then used his influence with colonial authorities to claim legal ownership once she revealed it. The debt of 13 generations, read one passage, signifies the 13 lunar months of a year. A complete cycle must pass before balance is restored. Each firstborn serves as tribute, one monthly payment to the spirits who guard the original bloodline. That evening, as the household prepared for Eleanor's modest birthday celebration, Cornelius was cornered by Dr. Thornfield in the library. Markedly, the scientist's appearance had deteriorated. His once precise attire now hung loosely on his frame, and his spectacles sat askew on his gaunt face. "I've been comparing the recorded symptoms of all previous Harvine firstborns," he whispered, glancing nervously at the doorway. Each developed unique manifestations, but all followed a similar progression. The most troubling aspect is that Eleanor's development mimics not one, but all previous cases combined. Across the mahogany desk, his notes were spread, meticulous charts tracking every Harvine firstborn's decline. William became obsessed with timepieces before his death, while Abigail collected bones and feathers. Your great-uncle Jonathan drew countless pictures of doors that existed nowhere on the property, while your father's sister heard voices in the well. All these behaviors simultaneously are exhibited by Eleanor, as if she is not just the 13th sacrifice, but the culmination of all who came before. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the parlor. Eleanor's voice raised in song, though not any melody taught by her music instructor. The Louisiana State Archives would later preserve this haunting tune in a collection of regional folklore, listing it as the Harvine lullaby with the notation origin unknown. Believed to predate European settlement, lyrics contain elements of French, Spanish, and Choctaw languages. The household staff reported that Eleanor sang this melody only when alone. Yet somehow all 13 verses were transcribed in Thornfield's journal, complete with annotations describing the curious physical response exhibited by listeners, an involuntary swaying as if rocked by unseen hands, accompanied by an overwhelming drowsiness that made it difficult to leave the vicinity of the singing child. As Eleanor's 12th year commenced, meteorological anomalies that defied explanation were borne witness to by the plantation. From the Falcon soil where sugarcane should have flourished, strange fungi emerged overnight. Pale, bulbous growths arranged in perfect circles that the field hands refused to disturb. For 3 consecutive mornings, the Mississippi flowed backward, a phenomenon documented by bewildered riverboat captains in their logs. Their ancient flight paths were altered by migrating birds to avoid passing over Magnolia House, creating a peculiar negative space in the autumn sky, a void where wings feared to venture. In Eleanor's presence, Thornfield's scientific instruments began to malfunction. Mercury thermometers shattered, though no one had touched them. Compass needles spun in frantic circles when she entered a room. To impossible depths that would have indicated an atmospheric pressure capable of crushing human lungs, barometric readings plummeted. "The boundary thins," Eleanor remarked casually over breakfast one December morning, spreading marmalade on her toast with methodical precision. Like tissue paper held before a candle, the lights from both sides showing through. That night, her daughter's bed empty was discovered by Eliza, the sheets arranged in a nest-like configuration with the silver locket placed precisely in its center. Through the moonlit corridors, panic propelled her, her nightgown billowing behind her like a spectral pursuer. Standing before the ornate looking glass in the disused ballroom, Eleanor was found by her, conversing with her reflection as one might chat with a dear friend across a garden fence. Most disturbing was that the reflection moved independently, gesturing with different hands than Eleanor raised, its lips forming words a half-second before the living child spoke them. "Must be a willing sacrifice," Eliza heard as she approached. "Only then can the circle close properly." First, the reflection noticed Eliza, its amber-green eyes widening in recognition before Eleanor herself turned. "Mother," the girl acknowledged with unnatural composure. "We were just discussing the ceremony." "We?" Eliza whispered, though she dared not approach the mirror. "The 12 who came before. They've each taken a month to teach me what I must know." To the reflection, Eleanor gestured, which now displayed not her image, but a shimmering collage of childish faces, some in antiquated dress, others in more recent fashions, all bearing the unmistakable Harvine features. May was William, June was Abigail, July was Thomas. New entries had been acquired by Cornelius's discovery of his great-grandfather's journal, the ink still damp on pages previously blank, written in a childish hand that nonetheless formed perfect copperplate script. "The 13th shall be both sacrifice and savior. Through willing surrender comes redemption." The circle closes where it began, at the bottom of the well, where first blood was spilled. From beyond the plantation's boundaries came no respite. Further visits to Magnolia House were refused by the parish priest, claiming an urgent mission elsewhere, though whispers in town suggested he had witnessed the communion wafer bleed when placed upon Eleanor's tongue. Wandering the cypress swamp was found the conjure woman who supplied Matilda with protective herbs, her mind fractured, repeating only, "The water rises. The water rises." With an unseasonable frost that painted the magnolia leaves with silver filigree, the 13th month of Eleanor's 12th year arrived. The calendar insisted it was August. Yet frost patterns on the south-facing windows were discovered by the gardener, delicate crystalline structures that upon closer inspection revealed themselves to be miniature renderings of the Harvine family tree, complete with names and dates that no living person had taught Eleanor. No longer slept Thornfield. Dark hollows beneath his eyes testified to nights spent transcribing the increasing anomalies. His scientific vocabulary gradually giving way to terminology borrowed from medieval demonology and Haitian voodoo. His correspondence with academic colleagues had ceased entirely. The last letter he received from Harvard bore a terse note suggesting a period of rest at a curious mountain retreat known for treating nervous exhaustion. "The convergence accelerates," he muttered to Cornelius one evening as they watched Eleanor methodically arranging 13 white candles in the parlor. "She exists simultaneously in multiple states, like Schrodinger's theoretical cat, both sacrifice and savior, both dead and alive." In the kitchen house, that food prepared for Eleanor transmuted overnight was discovered by Josephine. Fresh bread developed mold that formed perfect simulacra of human faces in profile. Their seeds into unrecognizable alphabets were rearranged by sliced apples. Into distinct layers of different densities, water in Eleanor's designated drinking glass separated, creating a perfect spectrum when light passed through it. A small silver scissors in her pocket was taken to carrying by Eliza, obsessively collecting locks of Eleanor's hair, as if preserving physical evidence of her daughter's existence. These auburn strands, stored in labeled envelopes within her walnut writing desk, would later provide 19th-century scientists with material for one of the earliest documented cases of genetic anomaly. For when examined under sufficient magnification, a double helix structure unlike any human pattern previously recorded was revealed by Eleanor's hair. The night Eleanor turned 12 and a half, precisely halfway through her 13th year, every timepiece in Magnolia House synchronized to the same incorrect hour, 1 p.m. 13 times chimed the grandfather clock in the foyer, its mechanism inexplicably altered. Impossible configurations of their hands were displayed by pocket watches and bedside chronometers, yet continued marking time with perfect precision. 6 months remaining, Eleanor announced at breakfast, methodically dissecting a soft-boiled egg whose yolk had hardened into a perfect sphere. The key begins to turn in the lock. That evening, as twilight painted the plantation in shades of indigo and amber, to the family cemetery, Cornelius found himself drawn. There, arranged in a perfect circle among the graves of the 12 firstborn Harvines, stood 13 empty chairs, 12 sized for children of various ages, and one adult chair that he recognized from his own study. The chairs faced inward, as if arranged for an intimate conference, though no living person had placed them there. At the circle's center lay a freshly dug hole, too small for a grave, yet too precisely shaped to be the work of animal or accident. From this depression, visible only when the setting sun struck it at precisely the right angle, rose a thin column of mist that tasted of well water when the breeze carried it to Cornelius's lips. With unnatural stillness, Eleanor's 13th birthday dawned. Through a peculiar haze that hung over Magnolia House filtered the morning light, neither fog nor smoke, but something in between, a veil between worlds growing increasingly diaphanous. Through their duties with the solemn gravity of funeral attendants moved the household staff, their whispers dying whenever footsteps approached. In the study, that the locked drawer where he kept his most private correspondence had been opened was discovered by Cornelius, though the key remained in his waistcoat pocket. Inside, arranged with mathematical precision, lay 13 objects he recognized with mounting horror. A child's tooth wrapped in silk, Abigail's first, lost in 1873. A brass button from William's christening gown. A tiny thimble that had belonged to his great-aunt Catherine before her 13th birthday in 1835. Items that should have been scattered across generations, some buried in coffins long decayed, others locked in family vaults or lost to time, all gathered as if for inspection. At the center lay a folded piece of parchment in Eleanor's meticulous handwriting. They have shown me where the collector keeps their treasures. Each tribute serves as anchor to this world. When midnight strikes on my 13th birthday, these anchors I shall take with me into the well. Completion the circle requires. As great-grandfather described in the hidden pages, prepare the ceremony. What transforms rather than perishes, do not mourn. Summoned to examine these artifacts, Thornfield handled each with trembling fingers. His scientific demeanor had long since abandoned him, replaced by the wide-eyed apprehension of a man confronting forces beyond rational explanation. Residual energy is contained by these objects, he murmured, passing a pocket spectroscope over the collection. If I were still a man of science alone, I would say they emit radiation of an unknown frequency. But I have witnessed too much in this house to maintain such pretenses. Late that afternoon, while searching Eleanor's room for any clue that might disrupt the approaching culmination, a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard was discovered by Eliza. Unlike her daughter's previous writings, this volume contained entries written in 13 distinct hands, each one recognizable as belonging to a previous Harvine Firstborn. Ice through her veins was sent by the final entry, dated that very day, though inscribed in faded ink that appeared centuries old. The 13th completes what the first began. Celestine's unborn child would have been the first of 13 generations. When Maurice cast her into the well, a bloodline that should have flourished alongside his own was severed by him. All these years, her justice has been preserved by the waters, waiting for the 13th child to make willing amends. What we could not, Eleanor understands. There is neither death nor salvation, but transformation. Unbroken, the circle must be. As dusk gathered, at dinner appeared Eleanor wearing a white dress none had seen before, its style reminiscent of garments worn a century prior. Around her neck hung 13 lockets, each containing a portrait miniature of a Harvine Firstborn. With unnerving intensity, her amber-green eyes reflected candlelight, and as if suspended in water, her copper hair seemed to float slightly, though no breeze stirred the heavy air. Tonight, she announced to her ashen-faced parents, what generations of Harvines have prepared for, you will witness. The debt will be settled, not with death, but with reunion. With the inexorability of fate, the hour of midnight approached, each tick of the altered clocks resonating through Magnolia House like a funeral bell. At the edge of the ancient well behind the kitchen house stood Eleanor, the silver moonlight transforming her white dress into a luminous shroud. Around her, 13 candles formed a perfect circle, their flames burning unnaturally still despite the rising night wind that moaned through the live oaks. From a distance, Cornelius and Eliza watched, their bodies frozen in a paralysis not entirely of their own making. In his final journal, Dr. Thornfield scribbled frantically, the pages whipping in the spectral breeze that somehow left the candle flames untouched. At 13 minutes past midnight, the conjunction occurs, Eleanor explained, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. When above the well, the moon aligns perfectly, the same position it held when Celestine and her unborn child were sacrificed 136 years ago. From the family cemetery came an impossible sound, the creak of hinges long rusted, the soft slide of earth being displaced. Repeatedly, herself was crossed by Matilda, watching from the kitchen window, as she witnessed 12 small figures emerge from among the gravestones, walking with solemn purpose toward the well. No shadows in the moonlight did they cast. These spectral children in clothing from different eras, yet their faces all bore the unmistakable Harvine features. Inside the house, though no one stood near enough to hear it, the grandfather clock began to chime. 1, 2. 13 sonorous notes that vibrated through the plantation's foundations. As she untied a velvet pouch from her waist, emptying its contents into her palm, 13 locks of hair, 12 collected from previous generations, and 1 cut from her own head that very evening, Eleanor smiled. The original sin was theft, she said, her voice now layered with other childish voices that seemed to emerge from the well's depths. Land stolen, life stolen, bloodline severed. The price was 13 generations of separation. The remedy is willing reunion. From her pocket, Eliza withdrew an aged journal page discovered only hours earlier in the false bottom of the family Bible. The final confession of Maurice Harvine, written in fading French on his deathbed in 1754. I confess my greatest sin was not the taking of Celestine's land, nor even her life, but the denial of my own blood. The child she carried was mine. And in my cowardice and greed, not only my lover I murdered, but my firstborn. The curse that now plagues my line is not hers but my own, the guilt that flows through our veins until atonement is made. Onto the stone lip of the well stepped Eleanor, her body swaying slightly as if already feeling the pull of the waters below. Behind her, a semicircle was formed by the 12 spectral children, their translucent hands linked in silent communion. The 13th child must choose, Eleanor said, her voice now entirely her own again. Death unwilling, as the 12 before me suffered, or transformation willing, to complete the circle and release both bloodlines from their century of separation. The water at the bottom of the well, untouched by moonlight for generations, began to glow with an opalescent radiance that illuminated Eleanor from below, casting her features in an unearthly light that revealed, for the briefest moment, another face superimposed upon her own, the serene countenance of a Creole woman with Eleanor's amber-green eyes. As the 13th clock chime faded into the whispering night, into the glowing well were cast the 13 locks of hair by Eleanor. Each strand spiraling downward like copper filaments drawn to a magnet. Hissed and bubbled the water below, releasing a luminous vapor that twisted upward in a double helix, enveloping her small figure in gossamer light. Willing transformation I choose, Eleanor declared, her voice resonating with sudden authority that belied her 13 years, not as sacrifice, but as restoration. From the shadows near the kitchen house emerged Josephine and Matilda, their aged faces solemn as they took positions at precise points around the well. They had known this moment would come, had perhaps always known through generations of whispered wisdom passed from servant to servant while Harvine firstborns perished. The blood calls to blood, Matilda intoned, removing from her pocket a small object wrapped in indigo cloth, a tarnished silver spoon that had been Celestine's only possession saved from the well. What was divided shall be rejoined. Her palm was extended by Eleanor, and the spoon was placed in it by Matilda. Incandescent at her touch grew the metal, melting and reforming around her wrist as a bracelet of liquid silver. Against the supernatural paralysis binding him struggled Cornelius, managing only to extend one trembling hand toward his daughter. "Eleanor," he gasped. "Please," she replied with gentle finality. "Father." "This was always my purpose, not to die as the others did, but to restore what was broken." Closer moved the spectral children, their translucent forms becoming more substantial with each step toward the well, their eyes, all bearing the same amber-green hue that had marked Eleanor since birth, fixed not on the living girl, but on something visible only to them in the glowing depths below. Thornfield's scientific instruments, arranged in a semicircle on a nearby table, began to register impossible readings. Past all calibrated measurements spun the barometer needles. Simultaneously, temperatures below freezing and above boiling were recorded by thermometers. Visible arcs of blue-white energy that jumped between metal components were